DotA Dragon's Blood is an animated series based on Dota 2 and its lore. What makes this anime special is that it seemingly starts as a typical fantasy story of knights, princesses, and monsters, but slowly becomes something more. Season 1 of the series is that introductory part where it follows all the classic tropes of fantasy settings, and while it is a bit generic, is a solid introduction to the franchise, especially for a video game adaptation. The anime follows the story of Davion the Dragon Knight, whose goal is to eliminate hostile dragons in order to protect the human population from their rampage. In his quest, he runs into Slyrak, the Eldworm of Fire, who fuses with Davion in order to become a human-dragon hybrid to fight off a demon named Terrorblade, who threatens the world with his goal to remake it in his image. Davion's path crosses with Mirana, the Princess of the Moon, a devout follower of the goddess Salamene, and Marcy, Mirana's bodyguard and best friend, who are both on a mission to retrieve the lotuses of Salamene from a thief named Fimrit. And behind the scene, the Invoker manipulates the events in his own efforts to stop Terrorblade. For those who don't know, Davion the Dragon Knight is a playable character from Dota, and while his personality has changed considerably from the game, it was for the better. A lot of people were critical of this choice in protagonist and setting for the anime because of its seemingly tropey and stereotypical fantasy setting, but Davion and Mirana are honestly one of the better picks and works especially well with the show's message and subversions that happen later in the series. I haven't played the Dota 2 tutorial for like 8 years now, but I remember Dragon Knight was the first hero you see and play as. Because of this, he is one of the more iconic characters in the game, and that may appeal to veteran Dota players. Dragon Knight is also a good pick for newcomers to the franchise because his design and character is easily shapeable into a heroic protagonist by tweaking his already established lore. DotA Dragon's Blood Season 1 starts the series off with Davion's backstory and how he gained his powers through his encounter with Slyrak. Though the events that lead up to Davion meeting Slyrak differ between the original lore and Dragon's Blood, the end results were the same. A dying Slyrak asks Davion to kill him, and as Davion honors the request, Slyrak slashes Davion's throat and fuses their blood together to become the dragon-human hybrid that we know and love. The series simultaneously introduces Mirana and her faithful encounter with Davion. While this level of familiarity isn't present in the original lore, the series does a good job of organically fusing the backgrounds of the two characters. Initially, we only learn of Mirana's goals, to find and return Salamene's lotuses, which are the vessels of the goddess's power. Following her is the introduction of a newly created character for the series, her bodyguard and friend Marcy, best girl by the way, who travels with Mirana in order to protect her. Marcy has unbelievable strength who, despite her small frame, can toss people around as if they weighed nothing. In Season 1, the origins of her supernatural strength is a mystery, but she fulfills her job incredibly well as Mirana's protector. Marcy was so well loved in the anime that Valve actually made her into a brand new hero in Dota 2 in direct response to this reception. These heroes eventually encounters and attempts to stop Terrorblade, the primary antagonist of the series. Terrorblade, despite being trapped in Valfell, uses his influence and the desires of others to convert other beings into his puppets. It is through this way, as well as negotiation, that he starts his capture of the Pillars of Creation. And in her own attempt to retrieve the lotuses of Salamene, the little disciple of the moon, Luna, is also introduced as a companion figure to Mirana. Luna is the bloodthirsty enforcer and general of Salamene's army who keeps the peace through violent means. Newcomer to the Dota universe, Fimrit is also integral to the story as the catalyst who kicks off the events that unfolds as the thief of Salamene's lotuses. And finally, rounding out the main cast is the fan favorite Invoker, who perhaps had the most change in personality in comparison to his in-game version. In Dota 2, the Invoker is an arrogant and narcissistic mage who looks down on everyone because they are not at his level of competence. In Dragon's Blood, however, the Invoker is a stoic, quiet, and grieving mage who, despite his brilliance, chooses to seclude himself from the world with his own hidden motives. While this is a typical fantasy story, what is uncommon in the anime series is that all the characters are adults instead of teenagers going on an adventure. This is a slight but important detail because it drastically changes the tone of the show for the better. That tone shift really allows for the series to feel as if the world is under threat rather than something a child could solve. In addition to this classic trope of knights, princesses, and monsters, there are some very subtle but key points that the anime does well. The knight isn't a fearless paragon of virtue. Davion has his vices and his flaws. The princess isn't an incompetent damsel only to be saved. Mirana is actually quite capable. And the monster isn't a mindless beast to be slayed. Terrorblade uses guile and cunning to manipulate the events. Another thing that the show does well is that the music is incredibly well produced. It really captures the spirit of the show with a slight haunting feel to it. The voice acting as well is very well done, especially because of talents like Yuri Lowenthal and Troy Baker. Even the less popular voice actors such as Laura Pulver does an amazing job voicing their characters. Looking back on Season 1 as well, key plot points have been developed here as subtle hints to Season 3, the crux of the story. It really shows that the producers and writers have planned the whole story in mind, even when writing Season 1. After rewatching the show several times, I have come to appreciate the groundwork that they have laid ever since the start of the show. And while I'll leave that for future reviews, I will say that they really knew what they were doing. I do think that the anime is excellent, but there are some flaws to it. For instance, the pacing, a popular thing to criticize about it, is a little too fast. Season 1 suffers from this because, to newcomers, seemingly random characters appear out of nowhere, which is not necessarily a disadvantage for people familiar with some of these characters. In addition, the show does jump from location to location, with little time to fully understand the places and people. The DotA world is very large, with vast amounts of land between the locations of the story. The show does somewhat fail to capture how large these distances are, with the amount of jumping back and forth between these locations, with less of the travel time shown. Also, with the amount of subplots happening around the main plot, it leaves less time for development for each specific plotline to an already arguably short show. Another point of contention is that while the majority of the main characters' voice actors are fantastic, some, such as Caden,
the armor, every piece forged from Dragon, the older the better. Adult, I took his strength,
are less than stellar, and while it isn't too bad,
So, can you move, Uru? Karen?
Wow, I really can't move my body.
it does mess up with the show just a bit. Overall, Season 1 of DotA Dragon's Blood sets up the series off fantastically, and while seemingly pretty basic, establishing the content of the story for both the existing fans and newcomers to the franchise was a necessity in order to properly convey the message that the show is trying to tell by the end of the third season.